Guys, welcome back to my new channel. Today we will see what if Harry Potter story. If you like the video, please leave like, share and comment and share with your friend. Now let's start the video.
Chapter 1, The Asset on the Doorstep. The night of November 1st, 1981, carried the kind of cold that seeped through cloaks and settled into bones. Ragnar pulled his enchanted leather coat tighter and cursed the mission that had brought him to this miserable stretch of suburban England. Privet Drive. Even the name offended him. A street of identical houses with identical lawns, inhabited by identical humans who lived identical lives. The magical signature that had drawn him here felt obscene in such a place, like finding a diamond in a dung heap. Magical residue confirmed, Griphook Sr. muttered, consulting a device that looked like a compass made of brass and spite. Powerful. Very powerful. Southwest, approximately 40 meters. Ragnar was young for a patrol leader, barely 80 years old, but he'd earned his position through results, not politics. The Reconnaissance Division existed to monitor magical anomalies across Britain, identifying potential threats to Gringotts' interests and, occasionally, opportunities for profit. Most nights produced nothing but paperwork and cold feet. Tonight felt different. There, said Bloodfist, the third member of their team. His nostrils flared. I smell blood magic. Old blood magic. Protection wards. They moved through the shadows with practiced ease. Goblins had walked human streets for centuries, and they'd learned early that the best way to avoid notice was to avoid caring whether they were noticed. Humans saw what they expected to see, and they never expected goblins. Number 4, Privet Drive looked exactly like its neighbors. A privet hedge bordered a small lawn. A car sat in the driveway. The windows were dark, the occupants asleep and dreaming their small dreams. On the doorstep sat a basket. Ragnar felt the magic before he saw the child. Wards wrapped around that basket like a mother's arms, blood wards, sacrifice wards, the kind of protection that could only be created through death. Someone had loved whatever lay in that basket enough to die for it. By the vaults, Griphook Sr. breathed. The baby couldn't have been more than 15 months old. A lightning bolt scar marked his forehead, still fresh, still carrying traces of magical discharge. He slept peacefully despite the cold, wrapped in blankets that bore no warmth charms, protected only by whatever ancient magic had been purchased with blood. A letter sat tucked beside him. Ragnar picked it up, broke the seal, Hogwarts, he noted with contempt, and read quickly. His lips curled back from his teeth in what humans might mistake for a smile. Potter, he said. Harry Potter. Griphook Sr. went very still. The Potter heir. The boy who lived, if the rumors are true. Rumors from our own informants. Ragnar's mind raced through calculations. The Potter vault was substantial, not the largest in Gringotts, but significant. Old money. Clean money. And if the whispers about Sirius Black were true, if he betrayed the Potters and been taken to Azkaban without trial, Harry Potter might also be heir to the Black Fortune. One of the largest vaults in Britain. We should leave, Bloodfist said. This isn't our concern. Everything is our concern if it affects the bank. Ragnar read the letter again. Dumbledore. The old wizard had placed the child here, with human relatives, in a house without a single ward beyond the blood protection. He'd left a letter explaining the situation and asking these muggles to raise the most famous child in wizarding Britain. In this house. On this street. With these people. Ragnar had made his fortune reading people and situations. He looked at the pristine lawn, the gleaming car, the utter mundane normalcy of everything around him. These humans would hate magic. They would hate anything that disrupted their precious ordinary lives. They would hate this child. Dumbledore is a fool, he said quietly. Dumbledore is one of the most powerful wizards alive, Griphook Sr. countered. He has plans that involve abandoning an asset on a doorstep in November. Ragnar crouched beside the basket and studied Harry Potter's face. The boy stirred but didn't wake. His magic pulsed against Ragnar's senses, warm and wild and impossibly strong for a child his age. Potential. The word whispered through Ragnar's mind. The boy had potential, not just wealth, but power. Raw, undeveloped, but unmistakable. A wizard raised by goblins. Trained by goblins. Loyal to goblins. The political implications alone made Ragnar's heart race. A bridge between their peoples. A weapon against those who'd marginalized the goblin nation for centuries. A statement that couldn't be ignored. And yes, access to two of the largest vaults in Britain didn't hurt. We're taking him, Ragnar decided. Bloodfist's blade cleared its sheath before the words finished leaving Ragnar's mouth. You've lost your mind. This is the Potter heir. Dumbledore himself placed him here. We cannot what? Cannot save a child from neglect. Cannot claim what's legally ours. Ragnar stood, the basket's handle in his grip. The boy is heir to vaults we manage. By the Treaty of 1612, we have the right to ensure the welfare of significant account holders. And I'm ensuring his welfare. The wizards will never accept this. The wizards accepted leaving a baby on a doorstep in the cold. Ragnar's voice went flat. Their opinion ceased to matter when they abandoned him. He didn't wait for further argument. Ragnar walked into the night with Harry Potter in his arms, and history walked with him. The portkey deposited them in the upper receiving hall of Gringotts, where the night shift clerks barely looked up from their ledgers. Arriving goblins were common. Arriving goblins carrying human infants were considerably less so. Patrol leader Ragnar. The night supervisor, a heavy-set goblin named Thornback, set down his quill with exaggerated care. Would you care to explain why you've brought a human child into the bank? I'd prefer to explain to the director. The director is asleep. Then wake him. Ragnar shifted Harry's weight against his chest. The boy had woken during the portkey travel but seemed content to observe his surroundings with wide green eyes, showing no fear. Tell him I've recovered the Potter heir from a situation of neglect and that we have perhaps 6 hours before Dumbledore discovers the boy is missing. I expect he'll want to be involved in those discussions. Thornback's expression shifted from irritation to calculation. Every goblin understood the weight of the Potter name. Wait here. He disappeared into the depths of the bank. Ragnar found a chair, goblin-sized, uncomfortable for humans, perfect for him, and sat with Harry Potter in his lap. The boy reached for his ear. No, Ragnar said firmly. Harry's hand stopped. He looked up at Ragnar with an expression of solemn consideration, then reached for his ear again. No. Ragnar moved the boy's hand away. You'll need to learn that word. It's going to save your life someday. Harry babbled something that might have been an argument. His magic pulsed, and a nearby inkwell rattled. Strong, Griphook Sr. observed. He'd followed Ragnar through the portkey, leaving Bloodfist to file reports and pretend he hadn't been part of this madness. Unusually strong for his age. His mother was talented. His father was wealthy and connected. Ragnar allowed Harry to grab his finger instead of his ear. The boy's grip was surprisingly firm. This one will be more than both. If we're allowed to keep him. We'll be allowed. Ragnar's confidence surprised even himself. The director didn't become director by ignoring opportunities. And this boy is the greatest opportunity our people have seen in 300 years. They waited in silence broken only by Harry's occasional babbles. The bank hummed around them, the constant, reassuring sound of wealth being managed, of gold being counted, of power being carefully maintained. Ragnar had spent his entire life in these halls. He knew no other home. Perhaps, he thought, looking at the human child who'd grabbed his finger and refused to let go, that was about to change. Director Grimclaw was ancient even by goblin standards. His skin had the texture of worn leather, and his eyes held the accumulated weight of centuries of deals, betrayals, and carefully maintained grudges. He ran Gringotts with an iron claw and a diamond-hard mind, and he did not appreciate being woken at 3 in the morning. "Explain," he said, settling into the chair behind his obsidian desk. "Quickly." Ragnar explained. "The magical signature. The doorstep. The letter. The wards. The child's heritage and potential worth." He left nothing out, including his own unauthorized decision to remove Harry Potter from Privet Drive. Grimclaw listened without expression. When Ragnar finished, the director remained silent for a long moment, his ancient fingers steepled before him. "You understand," he said finally, "that you may have started a war. The wizards won't go to war over one child. Perhaps not a war of armies. But Dumbledore." Grimclaw's lips curled. "Dumbledore plays a longer game than most. He placed that child deliberately. He has plans for the boy who lived, plans that you have now disrupted. With respect, Director, Dumbledore's plans involved leaving an infant in the cold with nothing but a letter and some blood wards for protection. The Muggles in that house would have abused him. I am certain of it. And you base this certainty on what? A feeling? On a century of experience reading people." Ragnar met the director's gaze without flinching. "On understanding what humans are capable of when they encounter something they fear. Those Muggles would have seen magic in that boy. They would have tried to crush it out of him. And when they failed, they would have made him suffer for their failure." Grimclaw was quiet for another long moment. Then he reached for a speaking stone on his desk and activated it with a touch. "Summon the council. Emergency session. Tell them." He paused, looking at Harry Potter, who had fallen asleep in Ragnar's arms with the complete trust of a child who had never known cruelty. "Tell them we have an acquisition to discuss." The council chamber sat at the heart of Gringotts, carved from living stone 3,000 years ago and modified countless times since. 13 seats surrounded a central platform, each occupied by an elder of the Goblin nation. These were the power brokers, the decision-makers, the ones who shaped Goblin destiny from the shadows. Ragnar had never stood before them. He was a patrol leader, a middle manager, a nobody in the grand scheme of Goblin politics. Now he stood on that central platform with a human child in his arms, facing 13 of the most powerful goblins alive, and tried not to show his fear. "The facts are not in dispute," said Elder Boneclaw, one of the more conservative voices on the council. "What we debate is whether this acquisition serves our interests. The risks are substantial. Dumbledore will not accept this quietly." "Dumbledore abandoned the child," Ragnar repeated. "Whatever plans he had, are still his plans." Boneclaw's voice cut like a blade. "He will come for the boy. He will bring pressure, political, economic, potentially military. Is one human child worth such conflict? One human child who stands to inherit 2 of our largest vaults." Elder Silvervein, who managed the bank's investment portfolios, leaned forward with interest. "The Potter Vault alone holds nearly 800,000 galleons in liquid assets. The Black Vault, if Potter's claim holds, contains over 2 million. We're discussing the potential future owner of almost 3 million galleons." "We're discussing a political nightmare," Boneclaw countered. "We're discussing an opportunity." Director Grimclaw spoke for the first time since the session began. The other elders fell silent. "Patrol Leader Ragnar. You brought this child here. Convince us he's worth keeping." Ragnar had prepared for this moment during the long minutes of waiting. He'd assembled his arguments like soldiers on a battlefield, positioning each one for maximum impact. Now he deployed them. "The wizards have controlled magical Britain for 1,000 years, he began. They've marginalized us, restricted us, treated us as servants rather than partners. We manage their wealth, but we don't shape their world. We fight their wars, but we don't share their victories. We've accepted this position because we lacked leverage. He shifted Harry's weight and continued. This child is leverage. He's already famous, the boy who lived, the only person to ever survive the killing curse. When he comes of age, he'll be one of the wealthiest wizards in Britain. And if we raise him, if we educate him, if we make him one of us. He'll never be one of us, Boneclaw interrupted. He's human. He'll think like us. Ragnar's voice hardened. He'll value what we value. He'll understand our ways. And when he walks into the wizarding world as an adult, he'll carry our perspectives with him. A bridge between our peoples. A voice in their halls of power that speaks with a goblin's wisdom. Or a weapon, Silvervein added thoughtfully. A wealthy, powerful, goblin-trained wizard who owes us everything. Such a tool could reshape British politics in a generation. He's not a tool. Ragnar surprised himself with the vehemence in his voice. He's a child. A child who deserves better than what Dumbledore planned for him. Raise him well, and he'll serve our interests because he wants to, not because we force him. That's the difference between an ally and a slave. Grimclaw's ancient eyes gleamed. And you believe you can raise him well? I believe we can. Our tutors. Our warriors. Our values. Teach him to respect gold and honor contracts. Teach him that words mean nothing without action. Teach him to be ruthless with enemies and loyal to family. Ragnar looked down at Harry, still sleeping peacefully. Give him what Dumbledore would have denied him, a home where he's valued for who he is, not what he represents. The council chamber fell silent. 13 elders considered the arguments, the risks, the potential rewards. In that silence, Ragnar felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This moment would be remembered. Studied. Debated for centuries to come. Director Grimclaw spoke first. We will keep the child. Boneclaw's protest died in his throat at a glance from the director. We will keep him, Grimclaw continued, on a trial basis. 1 year. If complications prove insurmountable, or if the child shows himself unsuitable, we will revisit this decision. But for now. He turned his ancient gaze to Ragnar. You brought him here. You argued for him. You will be responsible for him. Is that understood? Ragnar felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He'd expected to hand Harry off to professional caregivers, to watch from a distance as the boy grew. Not this. Not direct responsibility for a human child. He looked at Harry Potter. The boy had woken during the discussion and was watching him with those serious green eyes, one small hand still wrapped around Ragnar's finger. Understood, Ragnar said. I'll raise him as my own. The first year was chaos. Human infants, Ragnar discovered, required enormous amounts of attention. They couldn't walk for months. They screamed when hungry, when wet, when tired, when insufficiently entertained. They put everything in their mouths regardless of whether it was food, poison, or valuable antiquities. Harry Potter was no exception. He tried to eat a gold bar, Griphook Sr. reported during one of his frequent visits. He'd become an unofficial uncle to the boy, fascinated by Harry's development despite his initial objections to the acquisition. A gold bar. It's as long as his arm. How did he even lift it? Magic. Ragnar pinched the bridge of his nose. His magic assists him whenever he wants something badly enough. Yesterday he levitated his milk bottle from across the room. The day before, he somehow convinced the vault doors to open for him. The vault doors require blood verification. I know what they require. He still opened them. Ragnar watched Harry toddle across the floor of his quarters, chasing a floating light he'd created without any apparent effort. His power is considerable. The living arrangements had required adjustment. Ragnar's quarters, comfortable for a bachelor goblin, had been expanded to include a human-sized bedroom, a play area, and extensive protective wards. Staff had been hired, a human wet nurse for the early months, goblin caregivers for supervision, tutors who would eventually handle education. Dumbledore had come within 48 hours of Harry's disappearance, just as predicted. The confrontation had been memorable. "You have no right," the old wizard had thundered, standing in the director's office with his power radiating like heat from a furnace. "That child is protected by ancient magic. He must be raised by his blood relatives to maintain the wards you placed without his consent or ours." Director Grimclaw had remained utterly calm. The wards that were keyed to muggles who would have abused him. Those wards. "You cannot know, we know humans. Better than you do, perhaps, since we've dealt with them for millennia without the comforting illusion that they're basically good." Grimclaw's voice had gone cold. "The child's magical signature was distressed when our patrol found him. Not from the cold, your blood wards handled that. From something else. Something emotional." Dumbledore had faltered. Just slightly, but Ragnar had seen it. "The Dursleys are good people. The Dursleys left an infant on their doorstep for 8 hours before bringing him inside." Grimclaw had smiled without warmth. "We watched, Headmaster. We watched them find him at dawn, read your letter, and debate whether to call someone to take him away. We watched the woman, his aunt, his blood relative, look at him with disgust in her eyes. We watched the man suggest throwing him in an orphanage." Dumbledore had no response. "The child is a Gringotts account holder. A significant one. The Treaty of 1612 grants us authority to ensure the welfare of account holders who cannot advocate for themselves. Harry Potter cannot advocate for himself. We are therefore advocating on his behalf. This will not stand. The Wisengamot may debate the matter all they like. While they debate, the boy will remain here. Safe. Cared for. Educated." Grimclaw had risen from his chair, and despite being half Dumbledore's height, he'd somehow seemed larger. "You had your chance to protect him, Headmaster. You chose to leave him with people who would have broken him. We will not make the same mistake." Dumbledore had left without Harry Potter. He'd tried political pressure, legal challenges, and public opinion campaigns. None had succeeded. The goblins held firm, and eventually, the wizarding world had other things to worry about. The boy who lived was being raised by goblins. It was strange, unprecedented, possibly dangerous. But he was alive, and the Dark Lord was gone, and life moved on. Harry's second birthday passed with little fanfare. Goblins didn't celebrate birthdays in the human fashion. But Ragnar marked the occasion privately, watching the boy who'd become his charge destroy a set of enchanted blocks with systematic enthusiasm. Again, Harry demanded, rebuilding the tower just to knock it down once more. "You have remarkable focus for destruction," Ragnar observed. Harry grinned at him, a human expression that Ragnar had learned to interpret. "Fun. Most things that break other things are fun. The trick is learning when breaking is appropriate and when it isn't." Ragnar sat beside Harry on the floor, ignoring the protests of his aging knees. "Sometimes you must build. Sometimes you must destroy. Wisdom is knowing which moment requires which action." Harry considered this with the gravity of a 2-year-old, then knocked down his tower again. "Work in progress," Ragnar muttered. The boy's magical development continued to accelerate. By age 3, he could summon objects from across the room without visible effort. By 4, he'd learned to unlock doors that should have been impenetrable. By 5, he'd accidentally set his tutor on fire during a tantrum. Fortunately, goblin tutors were hardy creatures who considered minor immolation a professional hazard. But it was his other development that fascinated Ragnar most. "The trade delegation from the Swiss vaults arrives tomorrow," Ragnar explained during one of their evening lessons. Harry was 6 now, sharp-eyed and quick-minded, absorbing information like a sponge absorbs water. "They'll want to discuss precious metal futures." "What do you know about precious metal futures?" "Contracts to buy or sell metal at a set price on a future date," Harry recited. Used to hedge against price changes or to speculate on market movements. The Swiss prefer conservative positions. They don't like risk. And how do you know that? Because their vaults are mostly defensive. They don't invest aggressively. They protect what they have. Harry tilted his head. That means they'll want guarantees. Fixed terms. Minimal exposure. We can use that. Ragnar felt a swell of pride that he quickly suppressed. Goblins didn't encourage pride, it led to carelessness. How? Offer them what they want. Safe terms. Guaranteed returns. Lock them into agreements that benefit us more than them because they're too focused on avoiding risk to see opportunity. Harry's green eyes gleamed. Make them feel secure while we profit from their caution. You've been reading the trade journals. The ones in your office. You leave them on your desk. Harry smiled, the sharp, knowing smile he'd learned from his goblin tutors. You shouldn't leave important documents where anyone can read them. I leave them where the right people can learn from them. Ragnar allowed himself a small smile in return. You're progressing well. But remember, we don't cheat our trading partners. We negotiate firmly, we protect our interests, but we honor our agreements. A goblin's word is his bond. Why? If we can take advantage, because reputation is worth more than any single deal. Ragnar's voice hardened. Cheat someone once, and you profit once. Build a reputation for fairness, and you profit for centuries. Short-term gain is the thinking of fools. We think long-term. Always. Harry absorbed this lesson as he absorbed all lessons, completely and permanently. It was one of his gifts, this ability to learn and retain. His mind was like one of the deep vaults, once something went in, it stayed in. Ragnar sometimes wondered what that vault would contain by the time Harry came of age. The thought excited him almost as much as it terrified him. Combat training began at age 4. Griphook the Younger, son of Griphook Sr., named for his father in goblin tradition, was assigned as Harry's sparring partner. He was the same age as Harry, unusually small for a goblin child, and absolutely vicious in a fight. They hated each other immediately. You're slow, Griphook taunted after their first session, during which he'd knocked Harry down 14 times in 10 minutes. Human reflexes. Soft human muscles. You'll never be a warrior. I'll be whatever I choose to be. Harry picked himself up from the training mat, ignoring the bruises that would color his skin for days. And I choose to beat you. You can't. Watch me. Their rivalry became legendary in the training halls. Harry had strength and magical power, Griphook had speed and centuries of martial tradition. They pushed each other mercilessly, neither willing to accept defeat, neither able to achieve decisive victory. By age 6, Harry could hold his own against goblin warriors twice his age. By 7, he'd developed his own fighting style, a blend of goblin bladework and instinctive magic that his instructors had never seen before. By 8, he and Griphook were evenly matched, their sparring sessions drawing crowds of spectators who wagered on outcomes. Again, Harry said after Griphook swept his legs and sent him crashing to the mat. You said that 5 times already. Then I'll say it 5 more times. Harry rose, blade in hand, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. We're not done until I win. Griphook's eyes glittered with something that might have been respect. You don't know when to quit. Neither do you. That's why we're friends. We're not friends. We're rivals. Same thing. Harry attacked, and Griphook met him, and their blades sang in the ancient language of war. They never spoke about the shift in their relationship. Goblin culture didn't require such things. But somewhere between ages 8 and 9, they stopped being rivals and started being brothers, not by blood, but by something stronger. They performed the blood brother ritual on Harry's 9th birthday, cutting their palms and pressing them together while speaking words older than Gringotts itself. It wasn't a goblin tradition, exactly, it was older than that, from a time before goblins and humans had become separate peoples. Ragnar watched the ceremony and felt something shift in his chest. Pride, yes. But also fear. Harry Potter Gringotts, as he would soon be known, was becoming something unprecedented. Something powerful. Something that would change the world. Magical education proceeded alongside combat training. Harry's tutors came from across the globe, the finest minds gold could buy. He learned theory from Swiss scholars, practical application from Asian masters, history from ancient goblins who remembered the wars of past centuries. But his true magical education happened in the vaults. This door hasn't been opened in 400 years, Ragnar explained as they descended past levels that most Gringotts employees never saw. The vault behind it contains artifacts from the Mage Wars, items too dangerous to destroy but too valuable to discard. Why are we opening it? Harry was 10 now, tall for his age, with his mother's eyes and his father's unruly hair. His wand, goblin forged, with a dragon heartstring core from a beast that had attacked Gringotts 3 centuries ago, rested in a holster on his forearm. Because you need to understand what magic can do when wielded without wisdom. Ragnar pressed his palm against the door, letting the blood verification wards taste his identity. And because some of what lies within may be useful to you. When the time comes. The vault opened onto darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light. Harry raised his wand and whispered a light charm, and the darkness retreated, revealing rows of shelves that stretched beyond sight, each laden with objects that radiated power and menace. Don't touch anything without asking, Ragnar warned. Some of these items are cursed. Some are sentient. Some are hungry. Harry's eyes moved across the shelves with calculated interest. What's that? He pointed to a sword mounted on the far wall. Even from a distance, Harry could feel it calling to him, a siren song of power and violence that made his magic stir in response. That is the blade of Malachar. Ragnar's voice went flat. It's not for you. Who's Malachar? Ragnar was quiet for a long moment. A name from old stories. A king who ruled before kings. You don't need to know more than that. But I want to know more. And I'm telling you no. Ragnar's tone brooked no argument, the same tone he used in business negotiations, in council meetings, in situations where his word was law. Some knowledge has a price higher than you're willing to pay. Trust me on this. Harry stared at the sword for several long seconds. Then he turned away, accepting the refusal with the grace of someone who understood the value of choosing battles. But Ragnar saw the calculation in his eyes. Harry would remember this moment. He would wonder about the blade of Malachar and the old king whose name it bore. Someday, he would seek answers. Ragnar hoped that day was far away. Some truths should remain buried in the deep vaults, where even gold couldn't reach them. Harry's 10th birthday brought an unexpected visitor. My name is Sirius Black, the man said, standing in Ragnar's office with the desperate eyes of someone who'd lost everything and was fighting to hold on to what remained. I'm Harry's godfather. I've finally been exonerated. I want to see him. Ragnar studied the wizard carefully. Black was thin, prison thin, with the haunted look that Azkaban left on all its survivors. But his eyes were clear, and his magic, while damaged, was stable. You were exonerated 3 weeks ago, Ragnar observed. Why did you wait so long to come here? Because I needed to be. Black paused, swallowing hard. Ready. He deserves better than a broken man showing up to claim a connection he hasn't earned. You're still broken. But I'm trying not to be. Doesn't that count for something? Ragnar considered. Sirius Black's story had been all over the papers, the innocent man in prison for 12 years, the traitor Peter Pettigrew finally exposed, the failures of the justice system laid bare for all to see. Public opinion had swung wildly, from hatred to sympathy to something like guilt. But Ragnar cared nothing for public opinion. He cared about Harry. What do you want from him? He asked. Nothing. Black's voice cracked. I don't want anything from him. I want him to know he has family. Real family. Someone who loved his parents and would have died for him if I'd had the chance. I'm not here to take him away from you, I know better than that. I just want to be part of his life, if he'll let me. Ragnar believed him. Against his better judgment, against all his instincts, he believed this broken man who'd come offering nothing and asking for everything. Wait here. He found Harry in the training halls, running through blade forms with the mechanical precision of someone who'd practiced them 10,000 times. Blood Brother Griphook watched from the sidelines, offering occasional criticism that Harry ignored. There's someone here to see you, Ragnar said. Harry's blade paused mid-swing. Who? Your godfather. Sirius Black. Something flickered across Harry's face, surprise, curiosity, and beneath them both, a hunger that he quickly suppressed. The one who was in prison. The one who was innocent. Ragnar moved to stand beside his ward. He wants to meet you. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. What do you think I should do? It was a question Harry rarely asked. He'd learned early to make his own decisions, to trust his own judgment. That he was asking now told Ragnar how much this moment mattered. I think, Ragnar said carefully, that family is complicated. That blood ties don't always mean love, and chosen bonds are often stronger than inherited ones. But I also think that you deserve to know where you came from, all of it. The good parts and the bad parts. And Sirius Black was part of your parents' lives. He might help you understand them better. Harry sheathed his blade. I'll see him. The meeting was awkward at first. Sirius Black looked at Harry and saw his dead friends, James's face, Lily's eyes, something entirely new in the way he held himself. Harry looked at Sirius and saw a stranger wearing the clothes of family. But they talked. For hours, they talked, about James and Lily, about Hogwarts and the Marauders, about the war and its casualties and the future that had been stolen and the one that might yet be built. When Sirius left, he was crying. Harry wasn't, he'd learned to control such displays from his goblin tutors. But his eyes were bright with something that Ragnar had rarely seen in them. Hope, perhaps. Or something close to it. He can visit again, Harry said quietly. If he wants to. I'll make sure he knows. Ragnar rested a hand on Harry's shoulder, a gesture he'd learned from human caregivers, foreign to goblin culture but natural between them. How do you feel? Harry was silent for a moment. Like something I didn't know was missing has started to fill in. Is that strange? No. Ragnar tightened his grip briefly, then let go. That's exactly what family should feel like. The adoption ceremony took place on Harry's 11th birthday, before the full Goblin Council. It was an ancient ritual, rarely performed and never for a human. Harry stood in the center of the council chamber, wearing ceremonial armor that had been forged just for him, goblin silver worked with protective enchantments, lighter and stronger than any human craft. Ragnar stood beside him, dressed in formal robes that he hated and wore only for occasions of supreme importance. Who claims this child? Director Grimclaw intoned. I claim him. Ragnar's voice carried to every corner of the chamber. By right of guardianship held these 10 years. By bonds of teaching and learning, of blood and honor. I claim Harry Potter as my ward and heir. And does the child accept this claim? Harry stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. I accept. I take Ragnar as my guardian and the Gringotts nation as my family. I pledge my loyalty, my blade, and my magic to the service of the nation, now and always. The words weren't quite the traditional ones, human tongues couldn't form certain goblin sounds. But the intent was clear, and the magic that surged through the chamber recognized that intent. Director Grimclaw nodded slowly. Then let it be witnessed. From this day forward, you shall be known as Harrison James Potter Gringott, ward of Ragnarok son of Ragnarok, brother to Griphook, son of Griphook, member of the Gringotts nation by blood and by choice. Cheers erupted from the gallery, where Harry's tutors and trainers and the many goblins who'd watched him grow had gathered to witness this moment. Even Boneclaw, who'd argued against keeping the child all those years ago, managed something like a smile. But it was Griphook who reached Harry first, gripping his arm in the warrior's salute they'd developed during years of sparring. "Brother," Griphook said. "Brother," Harry answered. And in the depths of Gringotts, beneath levels that no living creature had visited in centuries, something ancient stirred. It felt the blood magic of the adoption ritual, the binding of a Potter to the Goblin nation, and it whispered to itself in a language that had been old when the pyramids were young. Soon, it thought. Soon. The summer before Hogwarts passed in a blur of preparation. Harry's wardrobe was expanded to include robes appropriate for wizard society, fine materials, tasteful colors, nothing ostentatious. His wand was examined, polished, and pronounced suitable for academic work. His trunk was enchanted with space expansion, weight reduction, and anti-theft curses that would make any would-be thief regret their life choices. "You'll be surrounded by enemies," Ragnarok warned during one of their evening discussions. "Not open enemies, the children of our enemies. They'll smile and offer friendship while plotting your downfall. Trust no one completely. Verify everything. Remember that every conversation is a negotiation, and never show weakness." "I know. You know the words. Living them is different." Ragnarok leaned forward. "Dumbledore will try to influence you. He's been waiting 11 years for this opportunity. He believes you're essential to some grand plan he's never fully explained. Don't let him." "I won't. The Ministry will watch you. The pureblood families will watch you. The press will watch you. Everyone will have an opinion about the boy who lived raised by goblins. Some will hate you for it. Some will fear you. Some will try to use you. Let them try." Harry's smile was cold and confident. "I've been preparing for this my whole life. I know what I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I know that everyone who underestimates me does so at their own peril." Ragnarok studied his ward, his son in everything but blood. The boy had grown into something remarkable, intelligent, disciplined, deadly when necessary, and absolutely unwilling to accept limits that others tried to impose on him. He was ready. "There's one more thing," Ragnarok said, pulling a small box from his desk drawer. "This was your mother's. We recovered it from the ruins of her home in Godric's Hollow, years ago. I've been saving it for this moment." Harry opened the box. Inside lay a simple gold necklace with a small pendant, a lily flower, worked in precious metals and enchanted to never tarnish. "She wore it every day," Ragnarok continued. "According to our sources, your father gave it to her when they were married. It carries no magical properties beyond preservation. But it was hers. And now it's yours." Harry held the necklace in his hands, staring at it with an expression that Ragnarok couldn't read. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright, not with tears, exactly, but with something close to them. "Thank you." His voice was rough. "For this. For everything. For taking me from that doorstep and giving me a life worth living. You earned it." Ragnarok stood and moved to stand beside his ward. "You worked for it. You became someone worthy of it. I merely provided opportunities. You made them count." Harry put on the necklace, tucking it beneath his shirt where it rested against his heart. "I won't let you down. I know." They stood together in silence, guardian and ward, father and son in every way that mattered. Outside the office windows, the endless work of Gringotts continued, gold being counted, deals being struck, wealth being managed. The machine that had shaped Harry Potter Gringotts into who he was hummed along, indifferent to the small moments of humanity that occurred within its walls. Tomorrow, Harry would leave for Hogwarts. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for just a moment, they were simply family. The night before Harry's departure, strange dreams came to him. He stood in a vast underground chamber, larger than any vault he'd ever seen. The walls were lined with gold, not coins or bars, but solid gold panels inscribed with runes that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the chamber stood a throne carved from a single massive ruby, and on that throne sat a figure that was and wasn't a man. "Little King," the figure said. Its voice was like stones grinding together, ancient and cold and utterly inhuman. "Little heir. Do you think you're free?" Harry tried to speak, but no sound emerged. "You wear chains you cannot see. You serve masters you do not know." The figure leaned forward, and Harry caught a glimpse of its face, beautiful and terrible, with eyes that had watched civilizations rise and fall. "Your blood remembers, even if you do not. Your blood knows what it owes." The figure raised one hand, and Harry felt something stir in his chest. His blood. His heritage. The Potter line stretching back through generations, carrying something within it that he'd never known existed. "One day, you will kneel before this throne," the figure said. "One day, you will understand. Until then, grow strong, little king. I prefer my servants formidable." Harry woke with a gasp, his hand pressed to his chest where his mother's necklace rested. The dream was already fading, leaving only impressions: underground chambers, a ruby throne, eyes that had watched the world for thousands of years. He lay in darkness for a long time, trying to remember what had frightened him so badly. But the details slipped away like water through fingers, leaving only a vague sense of unease. Tomorrow, he would leave for Hogwarts. Tomorrow, his real education would begin. In the deep vaults beneath his bed, behind doors that hadn't opened in millennia, something ancient settled back into patient slumber. It had waited 3,000 years. It could wait a little longer. Platform 9 3/4 buzzed with chaos on September 1st. Families crowded the platform, children shouted farewells, owls hooted, cats yowled, and the Hogwarts Express billowed steam like a dragon preparing to breathe fire. Harry observed it all from the entrance to the platform, cataloging faces, noting interactions, filing away information that might prove useful later. His Gringotts escort, 2 guards in civilian clothing who most humans would never notice, maintained a respectful distance. Ragnarok had wanted to come personally, but they'd agreed that Harry's entrance to wizard society should be his alone to make. A statement of independence. A declaration that he belonged here as much as any pureblood heir. "Are you Harry Potter?" The voice came from a girl roughly his age, with bushy brown hair and an eager expression that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. She thrust out her hand in a gesture of greeting that was slightly too enthusiastic. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all about you, well, not all about you, because there isn't much reliable information since you've been raised by goblins, which must be fascinating, and I have so many questions about goblin culture if you don't mind, and I'm also Muggleborn, which means I'm new to all this, but I've memorized all the textbooks already and, breathe," Harry suggested. Hermione stopped talking, blinked, and then laughed. "Sorry. I do that when I'm nervous. Talk too much, I mean. My parents say it's a coping mechanism. It's fine." Harry shook her hand with the firm, brief grip that goblins preferred. "Yes, I'm Harry Potter. No, I don't mind questions, though I reserve the right to not answer some of them. And your memory of the textbooks won't help you as much as you think. Practical magic is different from theory. You sound like you know from experience. I've been doing magic since I was 2 years old. Not all of it from books." Harry glanced at the train. "We should find seats. The best compartments will be taken soon." They boarded together, which was how Harry entered wizard society for the first time, with a Muggleborn girl who talked too much and asked too many questions and seemed utterly unintimidated by his reputation. She was nothing like what he'd expected. Perhaps that was why he found himself answering her questions honestly. "Goblin society is based on hierarchy, merit, and contracts," he explained as the train pulled away from the station. "Everyone has a place. Everyone knows their role. Advancement is possible but must be earned through results, not connections. That sounds efficient but exhausting. It can be both. Harry watched the English countryside roll past the window. But it's honest. Goblins don't pretend to be your friend while plotting against you. If they're your enemy, they tell you. If they're your ally, they honor that alliance. Everything is clear. Everything is defined. And wizard society isn't like that. Wizard society is politics wrapped in tradition, wrapped in lies. Harry's voice went flat. Everyone has agendas. Everyone has secrets. The trick is figuring out what people really want and whether it aligns with what you want. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You're very cynical for an 11-year-old. I'm realistic. There's a difference. The compartment door slid open before Hermione could respond. A pale boy with platinum blonde hair stood in the entrance, flanked by two larger boys who radiated menace and stupidity in roughly equal measure. I heard Harry Potter was on the train, the pale boy said. I'm Draco Malfoy. These are Crabbe and Goyle. Harry rose smoothly, his hand moving to rest casually near where his wand sat in its forearm holster. I know who you are. Your father was a Death Eater who escaped justice by claiming the Imperious Curse, and your family has been trying to undermine Gringotts' interests for 3 generations. Is there something you wanted? The temperature in the compartment dropped several degrees. Malfoy's expression flickered through surprise, anger, and something that might have been respect before settling into cold neutrality. My father made his choices and will live with the consequences. Harry didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his stance, didn't show any sign of aggression. He didn't need to. Is there something you wanted, Malfoy? I'm in the middle of a conversation. The standoff lasted 5 seconds. Then Malfoy's eyes flickered to Hermione, dismissed her, and returned to Harry with an expression that promised future confrontation. We'll talk again, Potter. I'm sure we will. Malfoy left. His bodyguards followed, glancing back with the confused expressions of people who'd expected violence and received something more unsettling. Hermione let out a breath she'd been holding. That was politics. Harry settled back into his seat. The first move of many. Malfoy wanted to establish dominance. I declined to let him. Now he knows I'm not an easy target, and I know he's not intelligent enough to hide his intentions. We both learned something useful. You learned all that from a 30-second conversation. I learned that from years of training and a network of informants who've been tracking Death Eater families since before I was born. Harry allowed himself a small smile. The conversation was just confirmation. Hermione stared at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected. No one ever is. Harry turned back to the window. Now, you had questions about goblin culture. Ask away. We have several hours before we arrive. She asked. He answered. And by the time the Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station, Harry Potter Gringotts had made his first friend in the wizarding world. It wouldn't be his last. The castle rose from the darkness like a dream made of stone. Harry had seen impressive architecture before. Gringotts itself was a marvel of goblin engineering. But Hogwarts was something different. The castle radiated magic in a way that even goblin structures didn't. It wasn't just built with magic, it was made of magic, soaked in centuries of enchantment until the very stones hummed with power. First years. First years this way. The giant who called to them was the largest human Harry had ever seen, easily twice the height of a normal man and 3 times the width. Hagrid, his intelligence files informed him. Keeper of keys and grounds. Known for his love of dangerous creatures and his loyalty to Dumbledore. Potentially useful. Probably dangerous in his own way. The boat ride across the lake gave Harry time to observe his future classmates. He catalogued faces and names, matching them to the files Gringotts had prepared. Neville Longbottom, heir to a respected family, Susan Bones, niece of the head of magical law enforcement, Hannah Abbott, from a neutral house with commercial interests. Politicians' children, warriors' children, merchants' children, all of them brought together in this ancient castle to learn magic and form the alliances that would shape wizard society for generations to come. Harry intended to shape those alliances on his own terms. The entrance hall swallowed them when they arrived, vast and torchlit and echoing with the footsteps of nervous 11-year-olds. A stern-looking witch met them at the doors, Professor McGonagall, his files supplied. Deputy Headmistress, Transfiguration Professor, former war hero. Strict but fair. Respected by students and colleagues alike. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, and her voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "The sorting ceremony will begin shortly. You will be sorted into your houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin. Your house will be like your family while you are here. Your triumphs will earn you points, any rule breaking will lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points wins the House Cup. Standard information, delivered with practiced efficiency." Harry listened with half his attention while the other half studied the hall's architecture, noting exits, defensive positions, and potential choke points. Old habits. The great hall took his breath away. For long tables stretched beneath a ceiling that reflected the night sky, stars glittering, clouds drifting, magic so subtle and powerful that it seemed like nature rather than enchantment. At the far end, a high table held the professors, and at its center sat Albus Dumbledore. Their eyes met across the length of the hall. Dumbledore's expression was unreadable, the pleasant mask of a politician hiding whatever he truly thought. But Harry saw something in those ancient eyes. Calculation, certainly. Curiosity. And beneath them both, a frustration that had been building for 11 years. Harry smiled slightly. Let the old man wonder. Let him plan and plot and scheme. Harry had been preparing for this meeting his entire life. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool before the high table, ragged and ancient and somehow managing to look disapproving of everything. When McGonagall called the first name, Abbott, Hannah, it stirred to life and began its work. Harry watched each sorting with professional interest. Hannah Abbott went to Hufflepuff, predictable, her family had been Hufflepuffs for generations. Susan Bones went to Hufflepuff as well, less predictable, the Bones family had historically favored Gryffindor. Hermione Granger went to Gryffindor, unexpected, he'd pegged her as a Ravenclaw. When Longbottom, Neville, was called, the nervous boy who'd nearly fallen into the lake stumbled forward and sat on the stool for nearly 3 minutes before the hat finally announced, Gryffindor. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin before the hat had fully settled on his head. No surprise there. And then, Potter Gringotts, Harry. The whispers started immediately. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Harry walked to the stool with the measured stride of someone who'd been trained to project confidence in hostile environments, sat down, and felt the hat settle over his eyes. "Ah," said a voice in his mind. The goblin-raised wizard. "I've been looking forward to this." Harry kept his mental shields carefully lowered, the hat needed access to sort him, and fighting it would accomplish nothing. "Have you?" "Indeed. You're quite unique, Mr. Potter Gringotts. A mind shaped by goblin philosophy, a heart still capable of human emotion, and enough raw power to make both worlds tremble. Where shall I put you? Where would serve me best?" The hat laughed, an odd sensation inside his own head. A goblin's question. "But I don't sort by advantage. I sort by nature. And your nature is complicated." Harry felt the hat rifling through his memories. His childhood in the vaults. His training with goblin warriors. His blood brotherhood with Griphook. His first meeting with Sirius. Everything he'd experienced, everything he'd learned, everything he'd become. Slytherin would suit your ambition, the hat mused. Ravenclaw would nurture your intellect. Gryffindor would honor your parents' memory. And Hufflepuff, actually, no. Not Hufflepuff. You're far too pragmatic for Hufflepuff. Then decide. The hat was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll give you a choice. Not because I can't decide, I know exactly where you should go. But because your choice will tell you something about yourself that you need to know. What choice? Gryffindor or Slytherin? The houses of your parents and your enemies. The house of courage and the house of cunning. Which do you choose? Harry considered. Gryffindor offered the protection of his parents' legacy, the trust of those who'd loved them, the moral high ground in any political conflict. Slytherin offered access to his enemies' children, the opportunity to reshape a house from within, the strategic advantage of being underestimated. Slytherin, he decided. I'll choose my own legacy. Not my parents'. So be it. The hat's voice carried satisfaction. But remember this, Harry Potter Gringotts, courage and cunning are not opposites. The bravest act is often the cleverest, and the cleverest act often requires more bravery than most possess. You'll need both before the end. Before the end of what? But the hat didn't answer. Instead, it shouted to the great hall, Slytherin. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the Slytherin table began to applaud, not the enthusiastic welcome other students had received, but a measured, calculating acknowledgement. Harry walked to his new house table and found a seat, noting the expressions around him, suspicion, curiosity, hostility barely concealed behind polite masks. He was in enemy territory now. Exactly where he needed to be. The feast began. Food appeared on golden plates, roast beef, chicken, pork, vegetables in a dozen preparations, puddings and pastries and enough variety to feed an army. Harry ate sparingly, his attention on his new housemates rather than the meal. So, said the boy across from him. Blaise Zabini, his file supplied. Italian mother, 7 dead husbands, reputation for neutrality and self-interest. The boy who lived in Slytherin. The pure-blood families must be having collective seizures. Let them. Harry met Zabini's eyes without flinching. I'm not here for them. Then why are you here? To learn. To grow. To prepare for what's coming. Harry glanced at the high table, where Dumbledore was watching him with an expression of polite interest that fooled no one. The wizarding world is changing. I intend to be part of that change. On whose side? My own. Harry allowed himself a thin smile. Always my own. Zabini studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We might be able to work together. Eventually. Perhaps. When you've proven you're worth working with. The conversation moved on, but Harry had made his first impression. Not a victim, not a pawn, not a boy overwhelmed by his new circumstances. A player. Someone who knew the game and intended to win. At the high table, Dumbledore's eyes never left him. Harry pretended not to notice. The game had begun. The Slytherin common room waited beneath the lake, a cathedral of green and silver where shadows pooled in corners and the weight of water pressed against enchanted windows. Harry descended with his new housemates, observing the way they arranged themselves, Malfoy at the center of one cluster, older students dominating the prime seating, everyone else finding their level in the hierarchy. Politics, even here. Perhaps especially here. Potter Gringotts. The voice belonged to a prefect, Marcus Flint, his file supplied. 7th year, Quidditch captain, family connections to several Death Eater houses. A word. Harry followed him to a quiet alcove away from the main crowd. Flint loomed over him, using his size to intimidate. A standard tactic. Boring. I don't know what game you're playing, Flint said quietly. But Slytherin has rules. Traditions. We don't welcome outsiders. I'm not an outsider. I'm a Slytherin, sorted by the same hat that sorted you. You're a goblin's pet. A half-blood with delusions of importance. Flint's lip curled. You don't belong here. And the sooner you learn that, the sooner what? Harry didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his stance. But something in his tone made Flint pause. The sooner you'll stop embarrassing yourself, the sooner you'll realize that threatening someone who was trained by goblin warriors might not be your wisest decision. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. Harry met Flint's eyes without flinching. I know who your family owes money to. I know which vaults are being watched for suspicious activity. I know secrets that would destroy your father's reputation and leave your mother begging for scraps. He stepped closer, close enough to whisper. You think I'm weak because I'm young? Because I was raised by goblins instead of pure-blood fools. I have access to resources you can't imagine. I have allies you'll never match. And I have absolutely no interest in playing dominance games with sixth-year thugs who think size equals power. Flint's face had gone pale. Harry stepped back, resuming his pleasant expression. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to make sure your friends leave me alone. And in exchange, I'm not going to use any of the leverage I have against your family. That's a fair deal. I suggest you take it. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Flint nodded. Good. Harry turned and walked toward the first-year dormitory. Pleasure meeting you. Behind him, Flint stared at his retreating back and wondered, not for the first time, what exactly the boy who lived had become in those goblin halls. Harry's bed was comfortable but unfamiliar. He lay awake for hours after his dorm-mates fell asleep, listening to the sounds of the castle settling around him. The creak of ancient stones. The whisper of magic through walls. The distant, impossible sound of the lake pressing against the windows. He was alone here in a way he'd never been alone in Gringotts. No Ragnarok to advise him. No Griphook to watch his back. No goblin warriors to defend him if things went wrong. Just himself, his wand, his training, and his wits. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. He pulled his mother's necklace from beneath his shirt and held it in the darkness, feeling the warm metal against his palm. She'd worn this every day. She died wearing it, probably, died defending him, died creating the blood magic that had saved his life and shaped his future. I'll make you proud, he whispered to no one. Both of you. I'll become something worthy of your sacrifice. The necklace didn't respond. Of course it didn't, it was just metal and memory, magic without mind. But holding it made Harry feel less alone. Connected to a past he'd never known, a family he'd never met, a love that had reached across death itself to protect him. He was the boy who lived. The heir of Potter and Black. The ward of Gringotts and the blood brother of Griphook. He was a dozen different things to a dozen different people, a symbol and a tool and a threat and a promise. But here, in the darkness, holding his mother's necklace, he was just Harry. A boy on the edge of something vast and unknown, trying to find his footing in a world that wanted to shape him into something he might not want to be. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, he would start building alliances and gathering intelligence and positioning himself for the conflicts to come. Tomorrow, he would be everything everyone expected him to be, and everything they feared he might become. Tonight, he was just Harry. And that was enough. In the deep vaults beneath Gringotts, in chambers that no living goblin had entered in 3 centuries, something stirred. The blood magic of Harry's adoption had resonated through the ancient wards. The connection between the Potter line and the seal had been strengthened, reinforced, made more powerful by the rituals that had bound him to the goblin nation. And the thing behind the seal had felt every moment of it. Soon, the deathless king thought. Soon the chains would weaken enough. Soon the blood would call to blood, and the old oaths would be remembered, and the world would learn what it had forgotten. He had waited 3,000 years. He could wait a little longer. But not much longer. In his dreams, Harry Potter Gringot felt something cold brush against his mind, a whisper of ancient malice, a promise of power and servitude, a reminder that some chains were older than memory and stronger than death. He woke with a gasp, his hand pressed to his chest, his heart racing. But by morning, he'd forgotten the dream entirely. Some knowledge, Ragnar had once told him, has a price higher than you're willing to pay. Harry was about to learn exactly how high that price could be. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Letter That Changed Nothing. The Morning Post arrived at Gringotts with the precision of a military operation. Ragnar sat in his office on the 47th floor, reviewing overnight reports from the Asian markets while a junior clerk sorted correspondence into 3 piles, urgent, important, and everything else. The urgent pile was small, a dispute over mining rights in Cornwall, a request for emergency liquidity from a pure-blood family whose investments had soured. The important pile was larger, dominated by routine matters that required his signature. The everything else pile contained a single letter bearing the Hogwarts crest. Director Ragnar. The clerk's voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty. This arrived by owl. It's addressed to Harry Potter Gringott. Ragnar set down his reports. In 10 years of raising Harry, he'd been expecting this letter. Dreading it, perhaps. The Hogwarts letter represented the beginning of the end, the moment when Harry would step out of goblin protection and into a world that wanted to claim him for its own purposes. Leave it. The clerk departed. Ragnar picked up the letter and turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the parchment, the quality of the seal. Dumbledore had waited 11 years for this opportunity. Every word of this letter would be calculated, every phrase designed to begin the process of bringing Harry under the old wizard's influence. Ragnar smiled without humor. Dumbledore was about to learn that Harry Potter Gringott was not a child to be manipulated. He found Harry in the training halls, running through morning exercises with Griphook. The 2 blood brothers moved in perfect synchronization, their blades tracing patterns in the air that had been old when Rome was young. Watching them fight was like watching a conversation in a language made of steel and motion. Hold. Both boys stopped instantly, their blades dropping to rest positions. Harry's face was flushed with exertion, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He'd learned long ago that Ragnar never interrupted training without reason. Your Hogwarts letter arrived. Harry's expression didn't change, but Ragnar saw the slight tension that entered his shoulders. I expected it would. We should discuss our approach. Griphook sheathed his blade with a flourish. I'll do my best. They walked to Ragnar's office in comfortable silence. Harry had grown tall over the past year, he'd be taller than most goblins soon, a constant reminder of the biological differences between them. But his bearing, his movement, his way of observing the world through calculating eyes, those were pure goblin. The letter is standard, Ragnar said once they were seated. Supply list, platform information, the usual bureaucratic formalities. But I imagine Dumbledore will want to meet with you before term begins. I imagine he will. Harry picked up the letter and read it through twice, his lips moving slightly as he memorized the contents. He's waited 11 years to get me under his control. He won't want to miss his opportunity. What do you want to do? Harry looked up, surprised. You're asking me? You're the one who'll be attending Hogwarts. You're the one who'll be dealing with Dumbledore's manipulations. This decision should be yours. Harry was quiet for a long moment, turning the letter over in his hands. Ragnar watched him think, recognizing the signs of deep calculation that he'd seen in the boy since childhood. Harry didn't make impulsive decisions. He analyzed, planned, prepared. I want to meet with him, Harry said finally. But on our terms, not his. Here, in Gringotts, where our authority is absolute. Let him come to us as a petitioner, not as a headmaster summoning a student. He may refuse. Then we'll know something important about how badly he wants me. Harry set down the letter. Either way, we gather intelligence. Ragnar felt a swell of pride that he allowed himself to show. I'll arrange the meeting. Is there anything specific you want to accomplish? I want to establish boundaries. Clear, contractual boundaries that he can't violate without consequences. Harry's voice went cold. I've read the files on what he planned for me. The Dursleys. The neglect. The isolation designed to make me desperate for any connection, any authority figure who showed me kindness. He wanted to create a weapon. I want him to understand that the weapon he wanted became something else entirely. And what did you become? Harry smiled, the sharp, knowing smile he'd learned from his tutors. Something he should be afraid of. The meeting was arranged for 3 days later. Harry spent those days preparing. He reviewed everything Gringotts had gathered about Dumbledore over the years, his political alliances, his magical accomplishments, his methods of manipulation. He studied the prophecy that supposedly linked him to the Dark Lord, a vague, ambiguous text that could mean almost anything depending on interpretation. He practiced diplomatic phrases and considered contingencies for every possible direction the conversation might take. Griphook helped him prepare by playing Dumbledore in practice sessions, adopting the old wizard's mannerisms, his indirect way of speaking, his habit of answering questions with questions. "You've done remarkably well for yourself, Harry," Griphook said in a passable imitation of Dumbledore's gentle voice. "But I worry that you've been isolated from your own people. Wouldn't you like to learn about wizard culture? About your parents' friends? About the world they died to protect?" "I appreciate your concern," Harry responded, keeping his voice neutral. "But I've hardly been isolated. I've received an excellent education, made lasting friendships, and learned skills that will serve me well throughout my life. What specifically do you feel I've been missing?" Griphook broke character with a snort. "Too defensive. You're letting him set the agenda. Try redirecting instead." They ran through the scenario again. And again. And again, until Harry could handle any approach Griphook could imagine. "He's going to try to separate you from us," Griphook said during a break. "That's his first goal. He'll offer you connections to your parents, to their friends, to the world they lived in. He'll make you feel like you're betraying their memory by staying close to goblins." "I know. Do you?" "Because it's one thing to know intellectually and another to feel it when he's sitting across from you, looking at you with those grandfather eyes, making you want to trust him." Griphook's voice softened. "I'm not saying you're weak. I'm saying he's good at this. Better than anyone we've ever faced." Harry reached out and gripped his blood brother's arm. "I won't forget who I am. I won't forget who my real family is. Whatever he says, whatever he offers, I know where I belong. You belong with us. Always." They finished their preparations as the hour of the meeting approached. Harry changed into formal robes, expensive but understated, showing wealth without ostentation. He strapped his wand to his forearm and a goblin blade to his ankle, concealed beneath the fabric. He wasn't expecting combat, but goblin training didn't allow for unpreparedness. "Ready?" Ragnarok asked as they walked toward the meeting chamber. Harry took a deep breath. "Ready." Albus Dumbledore arrived precisely on time, which told Harry something about his approach. The headmaster of Hogwarts could have come early, eager, desperate, or late, dismissive, establishing dominance. Punctuality suggested he viewed this as a negotiation between equals, or wanted Harry to think he did. The meeting chamber was a masterwork of goblin design. A round table sat at its center, sized so that no participant had a position of advantage. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting famous goblin victories, subtle reminders of who held power here. Enchantments prevented eavesdropping, recording, and most forms of magical interference. Dumbledore entered with the easy grace of someone who was comfortable in any setting. He wore robes of deep purple covered with silver stars, and his long white beard was tucked neatly into his belt. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, before settling on Harry with an expression of grandfatherly warmth. "Harry," he said, and his voice carried genuine emotion. "How wonderful to finally meet you properly. Headmaster Dumbledore." Harry rose and offered a formal bow, the goblin greeting for honored guests, neither warm nor cold. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Dumbledore settled into his chair with the ease of someone who'd spent a century mastering the art of appearing comfortable. I must say, you've grown into a remarkable young man. Your parents would be proud. You knew them. I did. James was one of my favorite students, brilliant, mischievous, loyal to a fault. Lily was perhaps the finest student of her generation, with a talent for charms that I've rarely seen matched. Dumbledore's eyes grew distant. They loved each other deeply, and they loved you most of all. Everything they did at the end was for you. Harry felt something stir in his chest, the hunger for connection that he'd learned to suppress but never fully eliminated. He wanted to ask more, to learn every detail about the parents he'd never known. But he recognized the manipulation for what it was. I appreciate you sharing that, he said carefully. But I suspect you didn't come here to reminisce. Dumbledore smiled, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. Direct. I appreciate that. Very well, let's discuss the matter at hand. He leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. Harry, I won't pretend that I'm comfortable with how things have developed. When I placed you with the Dursleys, I did so with the best intentions. You placed me with people who would have abused me. Harry's voice didn't waver. Our intelligence is very thorough, Headmaster. We know what kind of people the Dursleys are. We know what kind of childhood I would have had if Ragnarok hadn't found me. You cannot know, we watched them for 3 years after you placed me here. Ragnarok's voice cut through like a blade. We documented their behavior. Their comments about freaks and abnormality. The way they treated their own son compared to what they said about their unwanted burden. If you'd like, I can provide transcripts. Dumbledore was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. The Blood Wards provided protection from external magical threats. They did nothing to protect against neglect, abuse, or the psychological damage of being raised by people who hated what I am. Harry held the old wizard's gaze without flinching. You made a choice. You decided that keeping me hidden was more important than keeping me healthy. I understand the logic, even if I disagree with it. But let's not pretend your intentions were purely benevolent. The room fell silent. Dumbledore studied Harry with an expression that was impossible to read, not the grandfather mask now, but something older and more calculating. You've been very well trained, he said finally. I've had excellent teachers. Indeed. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Ragnarok, then back to Harry. I imagine you have conditions for attending Hogwarts. Several. Harry pulled a scroll from his robes and placed it on the table. First, formal acknowledgement of my goblin guardianship. The Ministry has been reluctant to recognize Ragnarok's authority over my welfare. I want that settled before I set foot in your school. Dumbledore nodded slowly. That can be arranged. Second, immunity from memory charms or any other mind-altering magic while on Hogwarts grounds. I've heard disturbing reports about students having their memories modified after certain incidents. That will not happen to me. A flicker of something crossed Dumbledore's face, discomfort, perhaps, or guilt. Those measures were taken for students' protection, my protection is my own concern. Third, a formal contract preventing any interference in my financial affairs. No attempts to access my vaults, redirect my assets, or influence my business dealings through your position as headmaster. I would never, then you'll have no objection to signing a contract stating as much. Harry smiled without warmth. You understand, I'm sure. Trust but verify. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, reading through the scroll. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful. These are reasonable requests, for the most part. I have some concerns about the wording, we can negotiate specifics. But the general framework is non-negotiable. And if I refuse? Harry shrugged. Then I'll attend Durmstrang instead. They've been quite eager to have me. Or Beauxbatons, I'm told their academic programs are excellent. Or I'll simply continue my education here, with tutors who've already taught me more than most Hogwarts graduates ever learn. You would truly refuse to attend your parents' school. I would truly refuse to attend any school that doesn't respect my autonomy and my family. Harry leaned forward. Let me be clear, Headmaster. I'm not the orphan boy you expected to find on that doorstep 11 years ago. I'm not desperate for connection or guidance or a sense of belonging. I have all of those things already. Hogwarts offers opportunities that I want to pursue, but it's not the only path available to me. If attending means sacrificing my independence, then I'll walk a different path. The silence stretched between them. Dumbledore's eyes were ancient and unreadable, weighing Harry's words, calculating probabilities and possibilities. Finally, he smiled, a genuine smile, touched with something that might have been admiration. Your parents would be proud, he said again, and this time it sounded less like manipulation and more like truth. Very well, Harry. I accept your conditions. We'll work out the specific language, but the framework is acceptable. Harry felt something release in his chest, tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. Thank you. I do have one condition of my own. Dumbledore's voice was gentle but firm. I would like you to meet with me privately from time to time. Not as headmaster and student, but as, let's say, an old man who wants to share stories about people you never had the chance to know. I have memories of your parents that I think you would value. I'm not asking for control or influence. Just conversation. Harry considered. It was a reasonable request, phrased in a way that made refusal seem petty. Classic Dumbledore, giving ground while gaining something more valuable. But the truth was, Harry did want those stories. He wanted to know his parents beyond the files and reports. He wanted to understand who they'd been, not just what they'd done. I accept, he said. With the understanding that our conversations remain private and are not reported to the Ministry, the Wizengamot, or anyone else. Agreed. They shook hands, wizard and goblin-raised child, manipulator and the weapon that had slipped his grasp. Neither fully trusted the other. Neither expected to. But they understood each other. And that was a beginning. The weeks before term began passed quickly. Harry's preparations intensified. He studied Hogwarts, its layout, its history, its political landscape. He memorized the names and backgrounds of every student who might be relevant to his goals. He practiced spells that weren't in any Hogwarts curriculum, tested equipment that goblins had designed for his protection, and ran through contingency plans until they became instinct. You're overthinking this, Griphook observed during one of their final sparring sessions. It's a school, not a war zone. Every social environment is a war zone. Harry ducked under a blade strike and countered with a combination that Griphook barely deflected. Different weapons, same principles. Resources, alliances, territory, reputation, they all must be defended and, when possible, expanded. You sound like Elder Boneclaw. Boneclaw is a survivor. There's wisdom in that. They fought in silence for several minutes, the clash of goblin steel echoing through the training hall. Harry had grown skilled enough that victory was no longer certain for either of them, their matches ended in draws as often as decisive outcomes. I'm going to miss this, Griphook said as they paused for breath. Training alone isn't the same. I'll be back for holidays. And summers. Hogwarts is temporary, family is permanent. Sentimental. I thought goblins taught you better. They taught me to value what matters. Harry gripped Griphook's arm in the warrior's salute. You matter. Whatever happens at Hogwarts, whatever I become there, that won't change. Griphook's expression softened, just slightly, just for a moment. Write to me. Let me know who to put on the enemies list. The list might get long. Good. I like long lists. Sirius visited 2 days before Harry's departure. His godfather had changed over the past year. The haunted look hadn't entirely left his eyes, but it was fading, replaced by something more alive. He'd gained weight, regained color, and found purpose in reconnecting with his godson and rebuilding a life that Azkaban had stolen. Nervous, he asked as they walked through Diagon Alley together, shopping for last-minute supplies. Prepared. That's not the same thing. Harry considered the question honestly. Perhaps a little nervous. Hogwarts is different from what I'm used to. Less structured. Less predictable. I'll be surrounded by people who don't think like I do, who haven't been trained like I've been trained. That might be good for you. How so? Sirius stopped walking and turned to face him. Harry, I love the goblins. They saved you, raised you, made you into someone remarkable. But they also made you into someone who sees the world as a series of transactions and threats. That's useful, essential, even, but it's not everything. What else is there? Fun. Friendship without calculation. Doing stupid things just because they're fun and dealing with the consequences later. Sirius's eyes sparkled with memory. Your father and I were idiots at Hogwarts. Absolute idiots. We broke rules for no reason, played pranks that could have killed us, and generally made nuisances of ourselves. And those were the best years of my life. That sounds irresponsible. It was extremely irresponsible. And wonderful. And I wouldn't trade those memories for anything. Sirius put a hand on Harry's shoulder. I'm not saying abandon everything the goblins taught you. I'm saying let yourself be young sometimes. Make mistakes that aren't strategic. Have experiences that don't serve any purpose except joy. Harry wasn't sure he understood. His entire life had been purposeful, every lesson, every training session, every skill acquired with future utility in mind. The idea of doing something simply because it was fun seemed alien. I'll try, he said. That's all I ask. Sirius grinned. Now, let's get you an owl. Every proper Hogwarts student needs an owl, and I know just the place. They found Hedwig in Elop's Owl Emporium. She was a snowy owl, pure white with amber eyes that seemed to look directly into Harry's soul. The moment he entered the shop, she fixed her gaze on him and refused to look away. That one's been here for months, the shopkeeper said. Won't let anyone buy her. Bit 3 customers who tried. Harry approached the cage slowly. Hedwig watched him come, her eyes unblinking, assessing him the way a warrior assessed a potential opponent. Hello, he said quietly. I'm Harry. Hedwig hooted once, a sound that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and challenge. I'm going to open the cage now. If you want to come with me, you can. If not, I'll leave you here and you can wait for someone better. He opened the cage. Hedwig stepped out, spread her wings, and flew directly to his shoulder, gripping hard enough to dimple the leather of his robes but not hard enough to break skin. I think she likes you, Sirius observed. I think she's decided I'm acceptable. Harry reached up to stroke Hedwig's feathers. She allowed it with the air of a queen permitting a subject's attention. We'll see if I can maintain her standards. The shopkeeper seemed relieved to be rid of his difficult owl. Harry paid without haggling. Hedwig was worth whatever price was asked, and they left the shop with his new companion riding his shoulder like she belonged there. You're good with animals, Sirius said. I understand them. They're honest in ways that people rarely are. Harry watched Hedwig turn her head to observe a passing wizard with suspicious intensity. She's already protecting me. We just met, and she's already watching for threats. Sounds like someone raised by goblins. Harry smiled, a genuine smile, not the sharp weapon he usually deployed. Maybe that's why we understand each other. The night before his departure, Harry dreamed. He stood in darkness so complete that he couldn't see his own hands. There was no sound, no sensation, nothing but the absolute absence of everything. Then a light appeared in the distance, not illumination, exactly, but the suggestion of illumination, the promise of something visible in the void. Harry walked toward it. He had no sense of movement, no feeling of ground beneath his feet, but the light grew closer with each step that might or might not have happened. When he reached the light, he found a door. It was ancient beyond measure, not old in years but old in concept, as if the idea of doors had been invented to describe this particular barrier. Symbols covered its surface, writhing and shifting like living things, and Harry recognized some of them from his studies. Binding runes. Containment wards. Magic designed to hold something in place for eternity. As he watched, one of the symbols flickered and died. Little King. The voice came from beyond the door, from the darkness that it held at bay. Little heir. You feel me, don't you? You sense what waits on the other side. Harry tried to speak, but no sound emerged. Your blood knows me. Your blood remembers the oaths your ancestors swore, the prices they paid, the debts that remain unpaid. The voice was ancient and cold and somehow familiar, like hearing his own heartbeat spoken aloud. One day, you will open this door. One day, you will kneel before me as your fathers knelt. The door shuddered. Another symbol flickered and went dark. Until then, grow strong. Grow powerful. Become worthy of the destiny that awaits you. The voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire void. I am patient, little king. I have waited 3,000 years. I can wait a little longer. Harry woke gasping, his hand pressed to his chest where his mother's necklace rested. The dream was already fading, slipping away like water through fingers, leaving only fragments, a door, symbols, a voice that promised and threatened in equal measure. He lay in darkness for a long time, trying to remember what had frightened him so badly. But the details refused to stay, dissolving into the general unease of a nightmare half recalled. In the morning, he forgot the dream entirely. But deep in Gringotts, in vaults that had been sealed since before the founding of Hogwarts, something ancient stirred in its chains. It had felt the boy's presence, the blood that called to blood across the distance of flesh and stone. Soon, it thought. Very soon now. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos. Harry arrived early, deliberately. He wanted to observe the dynamics before becoming part of them. From a carefully chosen position near a pillar, he watched families say goodbye, noted which students gravitated toward each other, identified the social hierarchies that would define his first year at Hogwarts. The Malfoys arrived in a cloud of expensive robes and barely concealed contempt. Lucius walked with the practiced arrogance of someone who believed himself superior to everyone around him, Narcissa moved with cold grace, Draco trailed behind them, trying to replicate his father's bearing with limited success. Harry watched them cross the platform, receiving acknowledgments from some families and pointed snubs from others. He noted who deferred to Lucius, who avoided his gaze, who seemed uncomfortable in his presence. Political mapping in real time. The Weasleys arrived next, a chaos of red hair and second-hand robes, loud voices and obvious affection. Harry counted 7 children of varying ages, all talking over each other, their mother trying to maintain some semblance of order. The father was absent, probably at work, ministry employee, his files informed him, misuse of Muggle artifacts office. Not wealthy. Not politically powerful. But numerous, and obviously close-knit. Family bonds could be more valuable than gold in certain situations. A small boy with a round face and nervous eyes appeared near the edge of the platform, accompanied by an elderly woman who moved with the stiff formality of someone uncomfortable with crowds. Neville Longbottom and his grandmother. Harry had studied the Longbottom file carefully. The boy's parents had been tortured into insanity by Death Eaters, making him almost as symbolically important as Harry himself. Another potential ally. Or at least, not an enemy. Are you Harry Potter? The voice came from behind him. Harry turned smoothly, one hand moving toward his wand out of habit, and found himself facing a girl his age with bushy brown hair and front teeth slightly too large for her face. I'm Hermione Granger, she continued before he could respond. I've read about you, well, not very much, because there isn't much reliable information, since you've been raised by goblins, which is fascinating. Really, I've read everything I could find about goblin culture, but the books are mostly written by wizards who clearly don't understand. Breathe, Harry suggested. She stopped, blinked, and then laughed with surprising self-awareness. Sorry. I talk too much when I'm nervous. My parents say it's a coping mechanism. Nervous about what? Everything. She gestured at the platform, the train, the students milling around them. I'm Muggle-born. I didn't know any of this existed until a few months ago. And now I'm supposed to go to a magical school and learn to be a witch, and everyone else has known about this world their entire lives, and I've already memorized all the textbooks, but I'm still afraid I'll be behind. You won't be. Harry surprised himself by interrupting. Magical ability isn't determined by background. Some of the greatest wizards in history were Muggle-born. And textbook knowledge is useful, but practical skill comes from practice, not heritage. Hermione stared at him. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more, aloof. You're the boy who lived, raised by goblins. All the books say goblins are cold and unfriendly. All the books are written by wizards who've never bothered to understand goblin culture. Harry's voice hardened slightly. Goblins value different things than wizards. They're not cold, they're practical. There's a difference. I didn't mean to offend, you didn't. Harry softened his tone. I'm just tired of hearing my family dismissed as monsters by people who don't know any better. The goblins saved me, raised me, taught me everything I know. I won't apologize for being one of them. Hermione was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she nodded slowly. I'd like to learn more about them. About goblin culture, I mean. If you'd be willing to teach me. It was such an unexpected request that Harry found himself agreeing before he'd fully thought it through. I can try. We'll see how the year develops. Thank you. Her smile was genuine and slightly overwhelming. I think we're going to be friends. Harry wasn't sure he knew how to be friends in the way she meant. But he was willing to learn. The train ride passed in conversation. Hermione asked questions about goblin culture with an intensity that reminded Harry of his own childhood, the endless hunger for knowledge, the need to understand how things worked. He answered as honestly as he could, explaining concepts that wizards typically misunderstood, correcting misconceptions that had become accepted as fact. So goblin inheritance law is actually more egalitarian than wizard law. In many ways. Goblins pass wealth based on merit, not blood. The eldest child doesn't automatically inherit, the most capable child does. Sometimes that's determined by the parents, sometimes it's determined by competition among heirs. Competition how? Various methods. Business challenges, combat trials, tests of cunning. Harry shrugged. The specific method varies by family tradition, but the principle is consistent, position must be earned. Hermione frowned thoughtfully. That sounds brutal. It produces competent leaders. Every goblin in a position of power has proven themselves worthy of that position. Can you say the same about the wizarding world? She couldn't, obviously. The wizarding world's hereditary power structures were a source of constant frustration even for those who benefited from them. Their compartment door slid open to reveal Draco Malfoy, flanked by the same thuggish boys who'd accompanied him on the platform. So the rumors are true. Malfoy's voice dripped with practiced contempt. Potter is making friends with mudbloods. Harry rose smoothly, placing himself between Hermione and the door. Malfoy. I was wondering when you'd work up the courage to introduce yourself. Courage? Malfoy's eyes narrowed. I don't need courage to deal with a blood traitor and his pet muggle. Then why are you standing in the doorway instead of coming inside? Harry's voice was pleasant, almost friendly, the tone Ragnarok used when preparing to destroy someone in a negotiation. Why are you bringing bodyguards to talk to an 11-year-old? Why did you wait until we were hours from the station before making your move? Malfoy's face flushed. I'm not afraid of you. Then come inside. Harry stepped back, gesturing to the empty seats. Sit down. Let's talk like civilized people. Unless you'd rather posture in the hallway and pretend that counts as dominance. The standoff lasted several seconds. Malfoy wanted to enter, Harry could see it in his eyes, the desire to accept the challenge. But he also understood that entering on Harry's terms meant surrendering the initiative. We'll talk later, Malfoy said finally. When you're not hiding behind your mudblood. I'm not hiding behind anyone. But I appreciate you making excuses for your retreat. It must be difficult, having to back down in front of your minions. Malfoy's flush deepened to true anger. You'll regret, I doubt it. Harry moved to close the compartment door. Give your father my regards. Tell him I'm looking forward to reviewing his family's account statements. The door clicked shut. Through the glass, Harry saw Malfoy's expression twist with fury before he turned and stalked away, his bodyguards trailing behind. That was. Hermione seemed to be searching for words. I don't know what that was. Politics. Harry settled back into his seat. First move of many. Malfoy wanted to establish himself as the alpha of our year, and I declined to let him. Now he has to decide whether to escalate or back down. Which do you think he'll choose? Escalate, probably. His father's reputation depends on his son's success. He'll push until something breaks. Harry smiled without warmth. I intend to make sure he's the thing that breaks. Hermione stared at him for a long moment. You're terrifying, you know that. I've been told. And I mean that as a compliment. I know. The Hogwarts Express wound through increasingly wild countryside as the afternoon wore on. Harry watched the landscape change, ordered farmland giving way to forests, forests giving way to mountains, and felt the school's presence growing stronger with each passing mile. Hogwarts called to him, its ancient magic resonating with something deep in his blood. Potter magic, perhaps. His family had attended this school for generations, had walked these halls, had left their mark on its stones. Or perhaps it was something older, the connection that all magical beings felt to places of power, the recognition that some locations were more than mere geography. We should change into our robes, Hermione observed as the sun began to set. We'll be arriving soon. Harry retrieved his robes from his trunk, the finest materials, subtly enchanted for protection, displaying his house colors in ways that wouldn't be determined until after the sorting. He'd had them made specifically for this moment, designed to communicate wealth and power without ostentation. Those are beautiful, Hermione said enviously, running her fingers over the fabric. Where did you get them? Gringotts has its own tailors. They don't usually work for humans, but they made an exception. Is it strange? Being human but raised by goblins? Harry considered the question. Sometimes. I'm aware that I don't quite fit in either world. Too human for goblins, too goblin for humans. But I've learned to make that an advantage rather than a weakness. How? By understanding both perspectives. Goblins see things wizards miss. Wizards understand things goblins overlook. I can bridge the gap, translate between cultures, find opportunities that neither group would recognize alone. The train began to slow. Through the windows, Harry caught his first glimpse of Hogwarts, a massive castle perched on a cliff, its towers reaching toward the darkening sky, its windows glowing with magical light. It's beautiful, Hermione breathed. Harry agreed, though he didn't say so aloud. The castle was beautiful, but it was also ancient, powerful, and filled with secrets that nobody fully understood. A place where he could learn, grow, and prepare for the challenges ahead. A place where his real education would begin. The Great Hall was everything the histories had promised and more. For long tables stretched beneath a ceiling that reflected the night sky, stars glittering, clouds drifting, magic so subtle and powerful that it seemed natural rather than manufactured. Floating candles provided illumination that flickered like something alive. And at every table, hundreds of students watched as the first years filed in, judging, assessing, categorizing. Harry kept his expression neutral and his senses alert. He'd been in hostile environments before, this was just another one, with different rules and different weapons. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall, looking ancient and vaguely disapproving. When Professor McGonagall explained the process, Harry listened with half his attention while the other half studied the high table. Dumbledore sat in the center, wearing the same grandfatherly expression he'd worn in their meeting. Beside him sat a hook-nosed man with greasy black hair and an expression of perpetual contempt, Severus Snape, Harry's file supplied. Potions Master, former Death Eater, currently a spy for Dumbledore. Or possibly a spy for Voldemort pretending to be a spy for Dumbledore. The intelligence was unclear. Other professors filled the remaining seats, tiny Professor Flitwick, who'd been a dueling champion in his youth, stern Professor McGonagall, who'd fought in the last war, a pale man with a nervous twitch and a purple turban that Harry's senses told him was hiding something unpleasant. Quirrell. Defense against the Dark Arts Professor. The file on him was thin, unremarkable career, sudden acquisition of the turban after a trip to Albania, increasing nervousness throughout the summer. Harry made a mental note to investigate further. The sorting proceeded alphabetically. Harry watched each student take their place, matching names to files, noting which houses claimed which students. The political landscape was already taking shape, Malfoy to Slytherin, obviously, Neville Longbottom to Gryffindor, surprisingly, he'd expected Hufflepuff, Hermione Granger to Gryffindor, also surprisingly, he'd expected Ravenclaw. Then McGonagall called, "Potter Gringotts, Harry." The whispers started immediately. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Harry walked to the stool with the measured stride of someone who trained to project confidence under any circumstances, sat down, and felt the hat settle over his eyes. "Ah," said a voice in his mind. The goblin-raised wizard. "I've been waiting for you. I've heard you say that." The hat's presence in his mind was uncomfortable but not threatening. It felt like being examined by something very old and very wise, something that had seen thousands of minds and found most of them wanting. "You're quite remarkable," the hat continued. "A human mind shaped by goblin values, a wizard's power tempered by warrior's discipline, and enough raw ambition to reshape the world. Where shall I put you? Where would serve me best?" A goblin's question. The hat seemed amused. "But I don't sort by advantage. I sort by nature. And your nature is complicated." Harry felt the hat rifling through his memories. His childhood in the vaults. His training with goblin warriors. His bond with Griphook. His first meeting with Sirius. Everything he'd experienced, everything he'd become. "Slytherin would suit your ambition," the hat mused. "Ravenclaw would nurture your intellect. Gryffindor would honor your parents' memory. And Hufflepuff, actually, no. Not Hufflepuff. You're far too calculating for Hufflepuff. Then decide." The hat was quiet for a moment. "I'll give you a choice. Not because I can't decide, I know exactly where you should go. But because your choice will tell you something about yourself that you need to know." "What choice?" "Gryffindor or Slytherin. The houses of courage and cunning. Where do you choose to belong?" Harry considered. Gryffindor offered his parents' legacy, the trust of those who'd loved them, the moral high ground in any political conflict. Slytherin offered access to his enemies' children, the opportunity to reshape a house from within, the strategic advantage of being underestimated. "Slytherin," he decided. "I'll make my own legacy." "So be it." The hat's voice carried satisfaction. "But remember, courage and cunning are not opposites. You'll need both before the end." "Before the end of what?" But the hat had already made its decision. "Slytherin." The great hall fell silent. At the high table, Dumbledore's expression flickered with something that might have been concern. Snape's dark eyes fixed on Harry with sudden, intense interest. And at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy's face twisted with an emotion too complicated to name. Harry walked to his new house table, found a seat, and smiled. The game had begun. The first week at Hogwarts established patterns that would define the year. Harry woke at dawn each day, running through exercise routines in empty corridors while the castle slept. He attended classes with focused attention, absorbing not just the material but the teaching styles, the political implications, the social hierarchies that each professor reinforced or challenged. Transfiguration with McGonagall was rigorous and demanding. Charms with Flitwick was joyful and creative. Herbology with Sprout was practical and grounding. History of magic with Binns was useless for anything except practicing meditation. Defense against the dark arts with Quirrell was troubling. Harry sat in the first class and watched the professor stutter and twitch his way through basic concepts, and every instinct he developed screamed warning. The man was performing weakness, and performing it badly, with the over-the-top nervousness of someone who'd learned to act from books rather than experience. More concerning was the turban. Harry's magical senses could detect enchantments, and the turban was wrapped in spells that shouldn't have been there, concealment charms, protection wards, and something else that felt dark and hungry and wrong. He filed the observation away for later investigation. Potions with Snape was a different kind of challenge. Mr. Potter Gringotts. Snape's voice dripped with contempt as he read the name from his roll. Our new celebrity. Harry met the professor's gaze without flinching. Professor. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? A test question, not from the first-year curriculum, but from advanced brewing theory. Harry recognized the trap: answer incorrectly and Snape would mock his incompetence, answer correctly and Snape would accuse him of showing off. The draught of living death, if brewed correctly. Though the question is somewhat academic, the correct proportions depend on the specific subspecies of asphodel used, and different sources disagree on the optimal ratios. Snape's eyes narrowed. And where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat, traditionally. Though synthetic alternatives have been developed by German apothecaries. The natural version is generally considered superior for emergency applications. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? There is none. They're the same plant, also known as aconite. The variation in names reflects regional differences in magical tradition rather than botanical distinction. The classroom had gone very still. Students who'd expected Harry to flounder watched with wide eyes as he matched Snape question for question. Even Malfoy looked impressed despite himself. Snape studied Harry for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, not warm, but lacking its previous edge. It seems you have some knowledge, Mr. Potter Gringotts. We'll see if you have any skill to match it. It wasn't approval. But it was something. The social dynamics of Slytherin House became clear within the first week. Draco Malfoy had positioned himself as the natural leader of the first years, leveraging his father's reputation and his family's wealth. Most of his yearmates deferred to him automatically, the pure-blood children because their families depended on Malfoy goodwill, the others because they didn't know any better. Harry refused to defer. You're making enemies, Blaise Zabini observed during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. The Italian boy had attached himself to Harry with the casual calculation of someone who recognized an emerging power and wanted to be near it. Draco doesn't like being challenged. Draco doesn't like being anything other than the center of attention. Harry watched Malfoy hold court across the common room, surrounded by his followers. He's been raised to believe he's exceptional. Learning that he isn't will be educational for him. And if he decides to educate you instead, then I'll teach him why that's a mistake. The confrontation came sooner than Harry expected. 3 days into the first week, he returned to the Slytherin common room to find Malfoy waiting with a half-dozen older students, 5th and 6th years, from the look of them. They'd arranged themselves to block the path to the dormitories. Potter Gringotts. Malfoy's voice dripped with false pleasantness. I wanted to introduce you to some friends. They've been curious about the famous boy who lived. Harry assessed the situation with the trained eye of someone who'd been preparing for physical confrontation his entire life. 6 opponents, various sizes, arranged in a semicircle. Malfoy in the center, protected. 2 obvious fighters, probably Quidditch players. 3 followers, nervous, possibly reluctant. Not ideal odds. But not impossible. Draco. Harry matched his pleasant tone. I notice you've brought reinforcements. Does your father know you need older students to handle your conflicts? Malfoy's smile flickered. Your father is under investigation by Gringotts for suspicious financial activity. Harry's voice went cold. His accounts have been flagged, his transactions are being monitored, and if anything happens to me while at Hogwarts, a very detailed report will be delivered to the Wisengamot detailing exactly which pure-blood families have been violating wizarding financial law. The older students exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. A first year was supposed to cower, not threaten. You're bluffing, Malfoy said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. I never bluff about money. Harry took a step forward, closing the distance. Let me be clear about something, Draco. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of your father. I'm not afraid of anyone in this room. I've been trained by warriors who would kill every person here without breaking a sweat. I've had access to information that would destroy your family's reputation beyond repair. And I have resources that make your family's wealth look like pocket change. He stopped directly in front of Malfoy, close enough to see the fear flickering in the other boy's eyes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop trying to intimidate me. You're going to tell your friends to back off. And we're going to coexist in this house without any more of this pathetic posturing. Because if you push me again, I won't just push back. I'll destroy everything your family has ever built. The silence stretched. Harry could feel the older students' uncertainty, their reluctance to commit to a conflict that had suddenly become more complicated than expected. Malfoy broke first. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Harry stepped past him, moving toward the dormitory. But feel free to delude yourself otherwise. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The incident in the common room changed things. Not publicly, Malfoy wasn't stupid enough to spread the story of his humiliation. But privately, among those who'd witnessed it, Harry's reputation shifted. He wasn't just the boy who lived anymore. He wasn't just the goblin-raised oddity. He was someone dangerous, someone who couldn't be pushed without consequences. The older students began treating him differently. Not with respect, exactly, that would take time to earn. But with caution. Wariness. The recognition that he might be more trouble than he was worth. Harry used the breathing room to build a network. He sought out students from neutral families, the Greengrasses, the Zabinas, the Devisas, and began cultivating relationships. Not friendships, exactly. More like business partnerships, exchanges of information, mutual benefit agreements, the careful construction of alliances that would prove useful later. Daphne Greengrass was his most promising contact. She was beautiful, with dark hair and ice-blue eyes that missed nothing. Her family had maintained strict neutrality during the last war, building wealth and influence while others destroyed themselves in ideological conflict. She understood power in ways that most 11-year-olds couldn't imagine. You're not what I expected, she said during one of their quiet conversations in the library. What did you expect? Someone damaged. Traumatized. The boy who lived raised by goblins should have been broken by now, caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Who says I'm not? She studied him with those calculating eyes. Because broken people don't move like you do. They don't speak like you do. They don't look at every room they enter and immediately identify the exits, the threats, the opportunities. Maybe I'm broken in ways that don't show. Maybe.